So, welcome everybody, and here we are coming into our third week of our virtual Lent series for this year. So, it's been great to have you with us in the last couple of weeks, and just to say as we begin today that Mary Colo is not well, so we're using her session, which she fortunately had from 3 years ago for Year C. So we'll be able to give her input at that stage, and if there's any questions there, I'll deal with them since I teach Luke's Gospel, so that might cover that one for you. So once again, you're very welcome on our Lenten journey as we enter more deeply into the readings, the richness of the readings that we're offered each week. And we acknowledge our country. For myself, I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and we begin by acknowledging their traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we gather today, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So for those of you who are still getting familiar with our presenters, we're here from YTU, Mary Rayburn and myself and Mary Colo, all faculty members at YTU. So it's great for us to have the opportunity to collaborate with Garratt, and it's been a few years now over a number of different topics and sessions that we're able to work together to help spread the word and help people grow in their faith and understanding, appreciation of it. And a special welcome to all of you and the teachers who are making the most of the opportunity for your accreditation. I'll just invite David now to read a prayer for this third Sunday of Lent.
Thank you, Chris. Loving God, Moses was tending the flock in the wilderness when he saw the burning bush and learned that where he was standing was holy ground. In mysterious ways, you always come to meet us on our journey to nourish and bring us to life. Keep us from falling into complacency. May we use this Lenten season well to open our minds and our hearts to grow as disciples. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Just over to you, David, if you've got some housekeeping there just to make sure that that's covered for our participants. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it is a true joy to work with the three of you and YTU on these sessions. Thank you ahead of time. As usual, everybody, a very warm welcome from myself and the whole of the Garratt team. We do truly thank you from wherever you join us, near and far. And I can assure you that the thousands of people who join us through these sessions and register come from across the globe, which is a wonderful testament to Mary and Chris's knowledge. And it's a wonderful recognition that the church community still wishes to progress and explore their faith, whether they be teachers, priests, or individuals. You're warmly welcome. Now, as always, and many of you have already started, so we're training you well. Those of you who are seeking teacher accreditation, if I could just ask you to put your name and your email, preferably the one that you registered for these events, into the chat. Please note that only Mary, Chris, and I can see your details. We do that to protect your own privacy. And also, if I may, people have been asking when they're going to receive their accreditation. They'd looked into their TAP system or the like. We will accredit the hours at the end of the session. So in April, we will make sure that all of your hours are added to your TAPS account. And if we've got any questions, or if you've got any questions, the team, myself or the team, will be happy to respond. But it will be April before, most likely, when I say April, I should really say April, May, because it'll be after Easter, I think. I better give I better unchain the team from the desks and give them a few days off over Easter so they can celebrate. So it will be after Easter, at late May. I'll come back later on. But Mary, you're going to lead us, as you always do. And you're always a tough act to follow. Chris and Mary really have to step up after your sessions.
You're so kind, David.
Indeed. So thank you, Mary. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you
I don't
very
know
much.
how you'll ever make up.
David.
I don't know how you'll make up later on, though, David.
Oh, well, I'm in trouble now, aren't I?
Yes, you are.
Yeah,
You've
you are
settled
in trouble now, I tell you.
Yeah.
Go on, you, Mary.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, David. So we're up to the third Sunday of Lent, or we're preparing for the third Sunday of Lent, and we come to Exodus chapter 3. And you can see again, they've left a few verses out. So I always encourage you to go and read the whole of the text from the Bible rather than from the lectionary. Just to say, the first week we were with Moses, and it was just before he died. Then we went back to Abraham and Sarah, and now we're back with Moses early in his his young adulthood. So that's where we're going to be tonight. So all of this happens before they leave Egypt, before they come to settle in the land of Canaan, and before they set up any of the monarchy. So we're back in this period, but we're in the early stages of Moses' life tonight. And we call this often Moses and the burning bush. But it's really Moses' call by God to, firstly, to be in relationship with God and to understand God's name, or a little bit of God's name. But it's also God's call to Moses to begin his leadership of the people. So the first week we were almost at his deathbed. Now we're back to the beginning of his vocation as leader of his people. And so we need to explore a little bit of this character and say to ourselves, well, who is Moses? And what is he doing in chapter 3 here? And I've put the full quote here, the full biblical reference here, even though there are some verses left out. What is he doing? And he's being a shepherd. He's shepherding the sheep of his father-in-law, Jethro. So Jethro is his father-in-law. And Jethro, we'll see later, has another name as well. Well, really two other names, but in this text we're calling him Jethro. And Moses, this younger Moses, comes to the mountain of God. And here in our text, it's called Horeb, but later it's the same mountain that will be called Sinai. So it is the mountain of God where the people later form the covenant with God. And it's really God who appears to Moses. We'll have a look at the text in a little while, but it's God. It says the angel of the Lord because the source that's written this part of the text is very careful about people actually engaging God. So angel is a term for messenger, and we see God in the symbol of the burning bush here tonight. So we have to also ask ourselves, well, what type of literature are we reading here? Because that's really important. And it's a narrative, it's telling a story, and it's a narrative that is about a call narrative, a vocation narrative. Sometimes people call it a prophetic call narrative because in a way Moses is also called as a prophet. And we have to ponder the importance of this story, this event that's told, in terms of the story. So it sets in some ways a significant beginning of the story, but also what's its significance theologically, because texts are not simply telling stories, they're also handing on meaning, and that meaning is the theological meaning. And as we look at this text, we need to say, well, who's speaking and what are they saying and to whom are they addressing this speech? Because there is a good bit of direct speech. And then I leave the question with you, do you see any structure in the text? So we're really focused on chapter 3, but we need a little bit from chapter 2 in order to understand what's happening. So in chapter 2, Moses is born into a family of the children of Levi, one of the tribes, one of the 12 tribes, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and then the tribe develops from Jacob. So he's born into this tribe. He's saved at a time when the Pharaoh has required of the midwives that they kill all the boys who are born to the Hebrew women. And he's saved by his mother by putting him in a basket and hiding him in the reeds. And his sister Miriam keeps watch and intervenes when Pharaoh's daughter finds him. So he grew up in Pharaoh's household. And that's quite significant. So he's a Hebrew, but he's grown up in the Egyptian household, in the household of the Pharaoh. And I think that must have been a source of him asking, where do I belong? You know, because no one who comes from one culture and yet is raised in a different culture, you know, it's a question. It's an important question. So when he was a young adult, he saw an Egyptian soldier beating a Hebrew, and he killed the Egyptian in trying to protect the Hebrew. So there's a care in this young man, and as a result of it becoming known, he fled into the wilderness, and there he met his father-in-law, Jethro, whose other name is Ruel, and he marries one of the daughters of Jethro, Zipporah. So he's settled there. So he's moved into a different society again, because Jethro is a priest of Midian. So he's moved into a different cultural context, and he's taking care of the sheep. So our text tonight, or our text for Sunday, is composed of two main sections, and I know this continues on a little bit from this, but the burning bush, which is a prophetic call narrative. So Moses is called by God to his vocation, his future vocation as leader of his people. And there's a second part, and it accompanies it. It's not that there's a division between the two, but it moves on then to the revelation of the sacred name. And there's another version of that in chapter 6. And I just leave that to you. This slide is for you to do on your own time, to compare the revelation of the sacred name in chapter 3 and the revelation of the sacred name in chapter 6. So our reading begins. Moses was looking after the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, priest of Midian. So he's moved into this third cultural group, and he's being a shepherd. And that's important, and it's important right throughout the Bible. The shepherd imagery, again with David in particular, and then in Ezekiel, God promises to be the shepherd of the people because some of the leaders aren't being good shepherds. So he's a shepherd. He led his flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Mount Horeb. And we know that that's the same mountain as is later called, or is differently called, Sinai. And we're told that quite specifically, it's the mountain of God. And there in that holy context, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in the shape of a flame of fire coming from the middle of a bush. So it's a bit extraordinary, and people will give you, there are certain bushes that do spontaneously burst into flame in the desert. That's not the point. The real point is God is symbolically appearing to Moses here and calling him, inviting him into a new vocation, a new way of life. So Moses looks, and there was the bush blazing, but it was not being burnt up. And it's wonderful, the curiosity of the man Moses here. He wants to investigate. I must go and look at this strange sight, Moses said, and see why the bush is not burnt. And our curiosity is invoked too. Now the Lord saw him go forward to look, and God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses, he said. Here I am, Hineni, which is a traditional response by prophets. Here I am. I'm present. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to respond. And it's a good little bit of Hebrew for us to learn too. Hineni, I'm here, God. I'm willing to do your work, to what you're calling me to do. So God says, come no nearer. Take off your shoes, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. And each of us stands in holy ground each day. And we may literally take off our shoes, or we may otherwise recognize it. But it's very important that we recognize that we are on holy ground. And here there are all sorts of indications. I am the God of it says in the translation that you'll read on Sunday, of your father, but your ancestor. He said, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. They're the three famous patriarchs who preceded Moses. At this, Moses responds. At this, Moses covered his face, afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, and here the verbs are wonderful, wonderful verbs. The Lord said, I have seen the miserable state of my people in Egypt. I have heard their appeal to be free of their slave drivers. Yes, I am well aware of their suffering. I mean to deliver them from the hands of the Egyptians and bring them out to that land, to a land rich and broad, a welcoming land, an inviting land, a land where milk and honey flow. Okay, so God's all of a sudden talking about the Hebrews back in Egypt, and Moses is already in Midian, not so far away, but not too, out of Egypt. Moses gets it straight away. Then Moses said to God, I am to go. Sorry. Oops. I have to read it from here because my screen keeps blocking up. And Moses said to God, I am to go then to the sons of Israel and say to them, or to the children of Israel, and say to them. So Moses gets it. God is inviting him into, God has seen the miserable state. He's heard their cry. God is going to deliver them, and he's inviting Moses into this. And so Moses says, I am to go then to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. But if they ask me, and this is how the connection between the two elements of this reading, if they ask me what his name is, what am I to tell them? So Moses at least doesn't know. Maybe Israel does. It's not clear, but he doesn't know God's name, God's special name. What am I to tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am, or Some people translate it, I will be who I will be. It's this sacred 4 letters, the tetragrammaton, the sacred name. We don't know how to pronounce it. Some people thought they did, and we have in some Bible translations it has vowels in it. We don't have the vowels, and we don't really know how to pronounce it. But it's connected with the verb to be. So I am who I am. I will be who I will be. The tense isn't clear. It's this sacred name that is revealed to Moses. This, God added, is what you must say to the children of Israel. The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. So by naming the patriarchs, they're familiar to the people. Maybe the name is new. But this same God is this name connected with the verb to be, and the God of the patriarchs. So they're all identified as the one God. And remember, at that time, different nations had different gods, and the Egyptians certainly had their own gods. So this is identifying this God, both by tradition, by the patriarchs, and with the new name that is revealed. By this name I shall be invoked for all generations to come. And we have a tradition in our in Christian tradition and in Jewish tradition that this name is not spoken. So we don't pronounce the name. And in 2008, the Vatican sent a letter to the Bishops' Conference really asking us in liturgy not to use the sacred name, because we start to use it flippantly and disrespectfully. So it is a sacred name. So Moses is sent to the people. Moses responds, and he's sent to them, and he understands. He's understanding. The prophetical narratives were probably written a long time later, but they are an affirmation of this call. They're a way of expressing the initial call. And we all know that. We don't always see as clearly as Moses is portrayed here as seeing his call. We don't always see it initially. It might be a call to parenthood. It might be a call to be a teacher. It might be a call to really be a disciple of Jesus. We have different calls. It might be a call to religious life, which was my call. But Moses, this is an affirmation of his call and a later understanding that he was really called by God to this long job of leading the people for a long, long time. 40 years is the round figure. So just our Lenten learnings here, and I have gone a little bit long, but it's a beautiful reading, and it does need some clarity, I think, around it. Number one, to notice that curiosity is very important, and it leads often to asking questions, good questions, in order to understand better. And that's what Moses portrays to us. And that's in part what the Lenten call is too, to go to ask important questions, to be curious about our faith life, to be curious about our own particular vocation as well as our collective vocation. Another question I think this reading asks is, how do we speak to God? What names do you use when you are in dialogue with God? I use different names for God at different times. Sometimes I get desperate and I want to yell at God and whatever, but different names there and different characteristics. And so Lent can lead us into this deeper meaning of our lives, this time of reflecting on the deeper meaning and on the meaning of our own vocation along with Moses's vocation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. That's a great, well, it's a great reading to explore, and
It
I can
is
understand how you wanted to do it justice. Fair enough.
a little bit of
And I suppose it's
justice.
interesting, a little bit of justice. I know we could spend a long time, and even further on, of course, how the text continues to where Moses wrestles with this new
Mm,
vocation that he's been given, and
mm,
of course, Aaron gets the job of being the spokesperson
yeah,
for him. So all this dialogue is such an important part. But isn't it interesting that where you're standing is holy ground? That's where we encounter God, and I think
yeah,
that's really important for all of us to be aware of in our Lenten journey or just our spiritual journey throughout our lives. It's not where you might want to be, not where you might think you should be, but where you are is where you're going to encounter God.
yeah,
And that's the thing.
yeah,
It's interesting also then the power of a name, because Moses knew if once you have in the ancient world, once you have the name of a god, you had some power over them,
yeah,
and this is why the riddle that is given in terms of God's name is such
yeah,
a powerful response, isn't it? Because God is always going to
mm,
be mystery. We're going to find out
yeah,
along the way. Um,
exactly.
and it's interesting then too when there's lots of names for God in the Old Testament, as we know. We won't go into
Mm,
that tonight. But in Islam, there's 99
yeah,
titles for God. So always saying that
yes.
God is more than our language can encapsulate. Yeah, so it's terrific. Okay, well, that's enough from me. I'll hand
Right.
it over to you as you go into the responsorial psalm for us. Thank you.
Now here we go. Um, so our responsorial psalm this week is Psalm 103, and you will have 102 in most of your lectionaries. Our response is the Lord is kind and merciful, and that word kind can mean compassion as well. It's sometimes in English kind is not a deep enough word to translate it, but it has that whole element of kind and compassionate and merciful. So this psalm has elements of true dialogue within it. At some points, it's an internal dialogue with self, I, my soul, or my being. It's about self-talk, about honesty, about being true to ourselves and deep. And it's necessary to talk to ourselves to really know what we think and what we believe. Maybe this could also be a good Lenten practice to talk to yourself about what really matters. And later in the psalm and later in life, we also dialogue well with others and with God because we know what we think and we can be honest about that. So this psalm also includes dialogue with God. Last week, God was spoken of as light and salvation. And this week, in our response, God is kind or compassionate and merciful. How easy it is to speak and to dialogue with a kind and compassionate and merciful God. And that's what this psalm presents. This is what we call prayer. Not so much saying prayers, although it will include that at times, but speaking to and listening to God. Always give God time to respond to our own prayer to God. And I think this is an important reminder. God's mercy is bigger than any mistake that you or I have made. And God's mercy is of the essence. So our mistakes aren't the end of things. They can be a great beginning. So as Chris said, the Muslims speak of the God of 100 names, and this little poster there says the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. And so the Muslims also remind us of the many attributes of God via this focus on 100 names. And I remind you that the Muslims are communities throughout the world are currently celebrating Ramadan, which is also a time of fasting and prayer and reflection. So we speak of God under different names also in our tradition in light of different attributes according to our communal and individual needs and circumstances. So here the psalm is in one way emphasizing that God is kind and merciful and compassionate. In some ways, this psalm is a meditation on God's hesed, and hesed can be translated God is love, but hesed is a special sort of love. It's got covenantal love. It's a steadfast love. It's not God saying one week, oh, he loves us, and the next week, oh no, God doesn't love us. It's a steadfast and a relational love, a dialogical love. So this psalm is a hymn, a song of praise. It's not a lament, and I often talk about laments, but it also includes strong thanksgiving statements as well. And I think just to notice in the psalm, God is the one who forgives all your guilt, all my guilt. God forgives. God heals every one of your ills. And I wish God would heal my arthritis right now, but I believe God will help me to manage it, and that will be the healing. So healing doesn't always mean zapping, but this is a God who forgives, who heals, and who crowns you with love and compassion. That's an ornament that we wear, a deep ornament. I don't mean just ornamental, but God crowns us with love and compassion. We have that capacity, and God acknowledges it and invites us to really live out of that. So Psalm 103 is a most beautiful piece of poetry. It praises God's action in the life of the individual and in the life of the community and in our relationship with God. And it also mentions an all. And I like to think that all now includes the whole of creation, the planet, the cosmos, the universe, not just human beings. So I won't read the psalm tonight because I've already taken a lot of time in the early stages. I leave that for you to read, and I suggest that you read the whole psalm, not even just the elements that are there for the responsorial psalm. Just finally, to look at some of the links between our readings tonight. So the burning bush in Exodus 3, God uses Moses' curiosity. God calls Moses to action, and God also calls us to action, invites us to really be true to our vocation and to be open to the next step, to go more deeply into our vocation. Psalm 103, we can respond. It reminds us that we can respond to God's attributes and acts, and that God is compassionate and merciful. But yes, we are called into that response and to praise all those acts of God. And then Corinthians, God guided Israel in a cloud. And in Luke, Jesus teaches that suffering and sin are not to be aligned. Sometimes we say if a person sins, a person suffers, then they've sinned. And the book of Job says, no to that. And the teachings of Jesus here remind us of that. So God's actions, God's kindness is unfailing. And even to notice, if you like, the kindness to the fig tree in the Lucan Gospel. All right, thank you very much indeed. And I hand it over to you now, Chris. Oh no,
Thanks,
just
Mary.
Mother Teresa reminds us: be kind and merciful. Let no one ever come to you without coming away better and happier. Be the living expression of God's kindness. So that's a beautiful reminder from Mother Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And that's true, isn't it? I mean, so you've got some rich themes there. Something I'd highlight too for the readings for this coming Sunday is an underlying theme about taking opportunities when they're given.
Yes.
So for Moses, it's going to be a matter of him taking the opportunity to take up his vocation. Paul is going to be stressing to the people in Corinth not to be complacent. And that's also in the gospel, isn't it? Because Jesus is saying, think about those Galileans there whose blood was mixed with their sacrifices, and the horror of that happening in the time of Pilate. But then moving to say, use the opportunity. And I think that's a real Lenten theme for us at the moment, to use the time that we have, because we can fall into the trap of thinking we've got endless opportunities when in fact
Yes.
we don't.
I'm coming
Yes,
to that time in life where I know I don't.
well, there you are. Well, indeed. So one of the things that I thought for the theme to start into the readings for Corinth is, we've all had that theme. Are we there yet? And of course for Moses, he was actually at the beginning of a journey for him and for the foundation of the people along the way. But it's the kind of complacency that can sometimes hit us when we think that we're already there, when we've already arrived. And I would say that's why one of the resonances there within the readings for this coming Sunday is not to be complacent. Of course, this could be my family, it could be your family, it could be any group of kids. I'm sure we've got a lot of teachers who've taken groups of students on their way on their journeys in buses. So yes, you know what that experience there. Are we there yet? Well, sometimes what's happened is that the people in Corinth thought that they already were. And just before I get into that, just want a little shout out to the people from St. Bede's. So we've got Brother Anthony, Brother Tony, and Father Martin, and Ria Green. So regards to all of you, and thanks for coming in after your family mass to be with us tonight. So one of the things that I think happens for the Corinthians is that they absolutely do have fallen into the trap of thinking they're already there yet. That's the problem. So they think they've arrived as Christians. They've been baptized, they've got the gift of the Spirit, but Paul sees things that they perhaps haven't seen. They're divided on the basis of who baptized them. And the first 4 chapters of the letter will be actually dealing with the fact that they're divided when they haven't been, when they shouldn't be. Paul will say, look, I wasn't crucified for you. Don't put your loyalty behind me or Peter or Apollos, because we're called to be one family. Some of them think that they're already saved, so whatever they do in their bodies is acceptable. So what that means is that, in fact, some of them have been thinking that, okay, we can go to sacred prostitutes in the temples or in the city, and that doesn't have any impact on their status as a Christian. So that's quite, Paul spends chapters 5 and 6 dealing with that question and other divisions that they had, because Christians were taking other Christians to court, and they were thinking that they were already there, and Paul is thinking, oh no, you're a long, long way away from that. So the context for our reading for this coming Sunday is that they are divided, with some thinking that eating meat that was sacrificed in pagan temples is acceptable. And Paul's response is, well, you're really forgetting some really basic thoughts. And some of the basic thoughts are, think about the impact of your actions on others. So if you think that you're already there, Paul's response is this: you're not. They forgot, or they didn't care about the impact of their actions on others. So they were in the community. There were members that were scandalized and troubled, and many used to worship in those temples. Like this is the temple of Apollo in Corinth, and that was from the 4th century BCE. And they felt like Christians were going back to idol worship. Other Jewish Christians felt that this was going against the first commandment and were horrified. They saw this as idol worship. So Paul is thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do in such a chaotic situation? And one of the things about Paul's letter to the Corinthians is, if anything was going to go wrong in the community, it went wrong in Corinth. And so it's a fascinating letter to see how Paul, as a 1st century pastor, deals with the problems that kept arising. They thought that had arrived. But Paul's idea is, don't get ahead of yourself. You're not ready to lift up the weights that you think you can. And so he has to come up with a rhetorical strategy to shock them in many ways, to see the world in a different way. So let's just see how he achieves that. Yeah. He shows them that you have to think about the impact of your behavior on others. You might have knowledge that idols don't exist, but if your brother or sister is badly affected by your actions, you are morally responsible. So Paul challenges their misplaced complacency by looking back to the time of the Exodus to address a problem in the present. So he goes back into the journey of the people to the promised land and reflects on it. So I've given you the context. The presenting problem is really about them being divided on behavior that doesn't, where people aren't concerned about others. So he's got to have a strategy to shock them out of their complacency. So let's have a look how he goes back to the past to deal with the present. So this is the text. I want to remind you, brothers and sisters, how our fathers and mothers were all guided by a cloud above them, and how they passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in this cloud and in this sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. So you can see already, if you're astute, that he's using Christian language. He's talking about baptism. He's talking about spiritual food and drink. So it's not going to be a long step for him to go from look what happened to the people on their way to the promised land to what might happen to you if you don't perceive the other with love, and if you take your Christian journey with a misplaced complacency. And goes on, and they all did drink from the same spiritual drink, for they all drank from that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. And you'd say, no, wait a second, what's going on here? You certainly wouldn't be reading in the Exodus journey of Christ being present. But there was a Jewish tradition there. Mary, you can see where this is going. So there'll be a couple of things I'll need to explain. But first of all, we just go through the text itself. So what was the experience of the people on their way to the promised land, and how they were given spiritual drink, which is now linked in with Christ. All right, so we then take it another step. And he said, in spite of all this, so in spite of all the blessings they had, most of them failed to please God, and their corpses littered the desert. Well, that's a bit of a shocking text, isn't it? But remembering that Paul is trying to shock these Corinthian Christians out of their complacency. These things have all happened as warnings for us, not to have the wicked lust for forbidden things as they had. You must never complain. Some of them did, and they were killed by the destroyer. All this happened to them as a warning, and it was written down to be a lesson for us who are living at the end of the age. So the person who thinks they are safe must be careful that they do not fall. So we can see how the aim of this rhetoric is to shock them and to remind them that don't be so sure that you've already arrived. Okay, so there's some details here that we'll need to unpack. So I've already highlighted the fact that Paul wants to shock them from their complacency. So like the people of the Exodus, these Christians have passed through the waters, baptism, and they've had spiritual food and drink. That's in the Eucharist, in the breaking of the bread. So he says, oh, okay, but if this happened to them, you need to get your act together, or you could be punished too. So this takes us back to what happened in Exodus and Numbers, when Moses strikes the rock to provide water for the thirsting people in the desert. So it started out as that tradition, but the tradition developed. The rock moved with the people. So in Jewish tradition, the rock here in the city of Rephidim was the rock later in the city of Kadesh. The rock was the well that followed the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. So what Paul does is he creatively identifies the rock as Christ. In doing so, he can warn the Corinthians against complacency, because if Jesus punished in the past, he can also do it in the present and in the future. Now we have to remember, this is not a dogmatic statement. This is not, you're never going to find this in any creed. This is Paul desperately trying to say, how can I shock my Christians into seeing the world as it should be and themselves as they should be and their obligations to one another? So we have to remember what Paul is trying to achieve. And so earlier on, Mary pointed out that when we're looking at a passage, we need to know what its context is, what its purpose is, what its form is. And so this is Paul drawing on his Jewish tradition and dealing with it creatively to try to bring about positive change. And of course, there's the other element that he brings up. Who was this destroyer that's mentioned in the passage? So the word olothrutes is only used here in the New Testament. It's most probably referring to the angel of death that we have in Exodus at the time of the Passover, the original Passover meal. So Paul, you can see, Paul is drawing out every stop he possibly can to try and shock the Corinthians to positive action for their brothers and sisters. Okay, so what about us as we come to this time of Lent? Well, first of all, how considerate are we of the feelings and sensitivities of others? The Corinthians, who are quite happy to be eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols, saying, look, there's no God but the one God, so we're not breaking any rules. Paul says, yes, but if you're offending somebody else, you need to think again. Secondly, a Lenten challenge is not to fall into complacency in our journey of faith, thinking that we're already there. Each day is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And thirdly, that our baptism doesn't mean that there's no more learning or growing to be done. In fact, every day is an opportunity to grow. Every day is an opportunity to grow in love and service and compassion. So that's it from me for now, and then hand over, David, if you can access Mary's video there from 3 years ago, dealing with the text from Luke. Thank you.
And I think the theme of the gospel is this theme of we're halfway through Lent and time's running out. So last week we left Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And coming down from the mountain, Luke says he set his face to Jerusalem. And in Luke's gospel, this journey to Jerusalem is very, very important. In Mark, it only takes 2 chapters. In Luke, it takes 10. So a lot of the teaching of Jesus happens in this journey. Talking to the crowd, in fact, it says in today's reading, there were thousands. That's in Luke 12:1, just before this reading. The crowd was gathered by thousands. And one of the issues that's faced in today's reading is the question of suffering. And Mary touched on this too. Why do bad things happen, especially bad things to good people? At this time in Israel, some people thought this was the only life we had. There was no life beyond the grave. And so it's here and now God has a chance to reward us with blessings if we live a good life and punish us if we live a bad life. That view was held by the Sadducees, and it seems to me many people today still feel that way when they say, oh, why is God doing this to me? But it's not the attitude of Jesus. So here's the reading. At that time there were some present who told him about the Galileans, whose blood Pilate mingled with their sacrifices. And Jesus asked them, do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were worse sinners than all the other Galileans? Were they worse than you? No. unless you repent, you will all perish as they did. So it's not that the people who had this awful thing happen deserved it. It just happened. They didn't deserve it. And their murder can't be laid on God. It was a brutal act done by a brutal man, Pilate. God wasn't part of it. And then Jesus reminds them of another incident that happened at the pool of Siloam, which was the main place where people went to get water. It would have been filled with people most days. And then a tower collapses. 18 were killed. So he says again, do you think that they were worse offenders than all the others? No. And then again, unless you repent. So this call for change. And see, the suddenness of these events, the sudden tragedies, show that we really never know when death might happen. And didn't we learn that this week with the very sudden and the shock to the nation of the death of Shane Warne and Senator Kimberley Kitching? So Jesus says to the crowd, mend your ways, repent, live lives that are righteous, live in a way that you are always ready to meet God. And that's what metanoia is, like a change of heart, change your way. And then he follows this up because, see, some in the crowd are thinking, people who are good look good, people who are awful look awful. And the next parable, Jesus gives a way of measuring, a way of knowing what's righteous, what's not righteous. And he tells this story about a fig tree. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. This is my neighbour's. And there was no fruit on it. So he says to the gardener, I've come here for 3 years and there's no fruit. Cut it down. Stop wasting the soil, the water. Okay? But the gardener says, leave it alone for 1 more year. Let me dig around it. If it bears fruit next year, that's great. If it doesn't, then you can cut it down. So the parable holds out hope that even if the tree has been barren until now, it may still bear fruit. It's worth waiting. Give it a chance. Maybe more time is needed, maybe more nutrients. Just give it a chance. And people will be judged according to how they live, not what they say or the clothes they wear. It's the fruit will show the goodness of the person or not. So in the next year, we've got all of these different politicians telling us how great they are and what wonderful things they're going to do. And we need to listen through the words and look for the deeds. Look for what's truthful. Look for the fruit, not just the rhetoric. So this time is short message isn't meant to frighten us, but to urge us to live authentically, to live fully. Are we people who choose life? So like the people in Jesus' time, oops, I didn't want to do that. Like the people in Jesus' time, Christian faith does make demands, and the demands go beyond an hour on Sunday. The demands really call for the choices we live out. What the choices we make in the polling booth, the choices we make at the supermarket, the choices going to the petrol bowser. So my question is, how do the gospel values impinge on the choices we make? And I remind you of how we started Lent with a reminder that time is Lent time. It's borrowed time. So time is short. Choose how we live it. And we've got images in the readings today of the God of compassion, the God who hears, who sees, who knows the sufferings of others, and who will act on their behalf.
I'm looking forward to Vatican II
We
session
certainly do.
in August and
Yes.
September. So we do have some.
Absolutely.
And in early April, we have a wonderful young Catholic female by the name of Alice Carrawardine, starting a session on 10 years of Laudato Si and
Oh, great.
what's next. So that's the first in a series. So some people who are on the session tonight might have seen some ads for that session on the 2nd of April. And Alice is
So that's pretty soon. Sure.
yeah, it's pretty
Yes.
soon. And Alice is a wonderful young woman in the church, and don't we need more women, and not just young women, but women, because they make the world go around and they make the church go around.
But young women are pretty important.
Well, very important, very important. So, and I'm sure everybody on the call tonight, all the females on the call tonight, would say that they're young women.
Maybe.
No. Anyway.
Young at heart is important.
Yes,
I think
indeed.
we've probably only got just one. We just got one question there about when did they first celebrate the Eucharist? Well, of course, you've got in Luke at the Last Supper, Jesus saying, "Do this in memory of me," and then by the time you get to Acts of the Apostles, not long after Pentecost, the disciples in Jerusalem described in chapter 242 as being faithful to the breaking of the bread and the prayers. And it also in Acts 20 verse 7 that they met to break bread. So we can see fairly quickly it became part of early Christian practice. And of course, Paul will be talking about in 1 Corinthians 11. So that's written about 50 in the early 50s. His version of the text, as he recalls, of the Last Supper, do this in remembrance of me, in 1 Corinthians 11:24, is pretty much what we've got in Luke. So what we'd say is the tradition of the Eucharist and the breaking of bread in memory of Jesus, that was very, very quickly established. What we don't know, of course.
I just want to say, but that's inherited from Judaism also, isn't it? And that's the Seder meal.
Well, yeah, sure, but yes, but what happens, of course, now is it's more, it becomes, yes, it's a regular occurrence rather than waiting for Passover. So it's interesting that they took that to heart as regular practice. Now we don't know necessarily who presided. Because they didn't have priesthood, and the question was about transubstantiation. Well, that's really from a philosophical language from another time. What they knew was that Jesus was present where two or three are gathered. Jesus is faithful to his promise to be with them, and that what they were doing is being faithful to his command to do this in remembrance of him, and not just remembering, but actually making it remembering us as well to be disciples. So I'm aware of the fact that it's 8:03, David. So you got any final words of wisdom for us today?
Well, no, I don't think I'm very wise at all. Although I did, I had an interesting conversation on the weekend with some friends who were talking about Lent, and they wanted to understand what a Lenten journey was, and aside, of course, from encouraging, encouraging them to join us tonight, the conversation got around to, the old age what do you do as a Catholic and a Christian? What do you fast through Lent? And I thought immediately of Pope Francis, who gave us 8 suggestions for fasting during Lent. So I just wanted to share them, if I may. And I wanted to give Pope Francis a shout out, of course. I'm sure he's watching. If anybody has ever watched Italian TV, they would be assured that this is far better TV watching than that. But Pope Francis says, fast from hurting words and speak kind words. He says, fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. Fast from anger and be filled with patience. Fast from pessimism and be filled with hope. Fast from worries and have trust in God. And so when you were talking throughout the night, that really resonated for me this evening. Fast from pressures and be prayerful. And can't we all take more time from the pressures of day-to-day life and the world we live in? Fast from selfishness and be compassionate to others. And fast from grudges and be reconciled. So that's how I answered the question from Christians. So as usual, we've got some ads. We've got a very special ad next week, so please join in. Chris, everybody will need to join in for the ad next week. I'm sure you'll understand the perspective that I'm offering there.
Thank you. I enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I come with you.
we do have the Notes on Prayer series from Pope Francis for the Jubilee. So that is available. You can see they're not huge books in any way, shape or form, but they are essential reading, I think, for this holy year of Jubilee. And we've still got stock of Andy Hamilton's fine work on taking a path through Easter and perspectives there. We've got Mary's book on Psalms. So if you enjoy Mary's dive into the Psalms every week, we have a friendly guide to the Psalms Mary's prepared a number of years ago. And Michael McGurr, who I saw yesterday, has a wonderful This Cup We Bless book as a journey. So there's many ways to take that journey through prayer or through reading. And also, so we'll put those ads on the video, which will be available on Friday. And also we will ask, or we won't ask, we will suggest YTU's very important bank account details. And if anybody would like to support Mary or Chris and the YTU community, I'm sure they're very grateful for $1 or $2, even in this hard times. So thank you very much for tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Our wonderful presenters. And I need to talk to you about, Chris, how Paul would be going with the letters if he was living today. Because I would imagine he'd be working away on that typewriter like there was frantically.
He'd be out on social media.
He'd be the busiest man around, I would think. So thanks, everybody. Many blessings for the week.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again in the blink of an eye next Tuesday night.
Great.
Beautiful.
And enjoy Sunday. Enjoy the readings.
Indeed. Thank you very much, everybody.